of the camp of the middle. From here we learn out. So that would be the middle.
Yeah. Things. Everybody wake up in the middle of the night, and there they wake up and they see all this completely surrounded. And they were panic-stricken. They didn't know what was happening.
Oh, they thought that God knows what they were being attacked by. And they start carving each other up until over 100,000 of the enemy soldiers killed themselves. And so he pursued, the 300 pursued the 1,000 that ran away. 30,000 he pursued them, and he tried to, and he finally overtook them. And when they came back, they wanted to appoint him the king of Israel, and his sons after him. And he said, the important thing is to understand that in order to come to the knowledge of Torah, you have to come Reshis Chochmah, and you cannot come to Yiras Hashem until you have Anivas. You have to have humility. You can't learn Torah on a serious level unless you have that Anivas. So this is, when we're talking about the Oniv and the series there, talking about a situation where you have then the original type.
Yes.
It is a requirement to become to approach a knowledge, a humble type, and then you eventually come to Yiras Hashem, and then Yiras Hashem is the key to acquiring truth. So, if it would be used in as we say in anything that would have a relevance to
creating himself from the mass of God. He's excluding himself. He's withdrawing himself.
This is the most frequent way in which you express this concept. Understand? It's the most frequent way of expressing this concept. Now let's go look over here. So it says like this: Toshma al tos ki zikna imecho. Don't hold in contempt. Mishlei says when your mother becomes old. Don't hold in contempt what Boaz said that you want to describe it, that he just made up his own mind in this regard, because he has something dependent for his generation, and as such, and it's a time to do for God, they are destroying your Torah. This is the whole sentence. It is a time to do for God because they're destroying your Torah. Now, what does this mean? Rabbi says, Haikra, this passage, Miresha L'Seifo, you can explain it from the first part to the second part. There is sometimes that you should do for God, you should go and make and emphasize that you have to punish those that transgress the will of God. Why? Because they're trying to destroy His Torah. And sometimes, sometimes you can interpret it the other way around. What does that mean? Sometimes it happens, those that are destroying His are the ones that are doing His will. Sometimes there's a time to go and apply punishment to people that are going against the will of God, and to destroy God's Torah. That means to destroy a particular mitzvah in the Torah temporarily. In effect, you are doing His will, like that. Yes.
When you write,
we had a mitzvah there that was not to be written, down. It was the will of God not to write it down, but came a time that the Torah could have been forgotten from Israel, and so the Chachamim got together and says it's a time we must violate this prohibition in order that the Torah should not be forgotten from Israel. And the same thing about where he built a private altar, even though it's not permitted to build a private altar because he had to go and re-emphasize the sovereignty of the Rabbi Shalom as contraposed against idol worship. So sometimes it is necessary in a particular crisis situation for a Jewish Ben Torah to rise to the occasion and appear on the surface contradicting one of the rules of the Torah. In other words,
the reason you were teaching us when instated this peace be, shalom, God agree with you, because the generation was so.
That's right.
He didn't want him to slip away any further.
That's right.
So you bring it in conversation.
That's right. You remember that. Remember that Boaz went through this because he wanted them to come back to do tshuva and to be in terminology of God. And their David verses like this. And the other way around, The Sefer L'Reisha Midrash Mishum Gam. It's a time to do for God. Brisa Hilo Hazokan Omer. Hilo Hazokan says, Amachnising at the time that the generation is such. Yeah, the sages of our generation is such that they scatter Torah. At the time, the time that the generation is the time when the generation of that we live. For instance, unfortunately, in our generation, for instance, we don't have too much knowledge of Torah. We have better than we had the generation before, but still not too much. At the time that the sages, the qualified sages of the generation, are not. Your individual responsibility is Peter. You must learn with students. In other words, you must rise to the occasion. Because of the fact there is a diminution of learning, you must in turn fill the gap.
This is
when we don't have, for instance, we have analyzed this many times that unfortunately the amount of Jewish education that's touching Jewish people is a very small amount in relation to how much the Jews are around. And this is a time where every Jew that is capable must spread the knowledge of Torah as much as he can. The Fozrim, at the time where they are great Talmud scholars that are spreading the word of Torah all over, then you, as an individual scholar, you can sit and gather and learn by yourself. You have Hashem, there are others engaged in that meritorious activity. So, if you see a generation that the Torah is very precious to it, in other words, they want to learn, then you have the obligation to spread it. You should spread it. They want to learn. So those that they spread out the Torah, they add more, because the more Torah you teach others, the more Torah you're learning yourself. You learn the most from your students. Your students ask the questions. Or he said, if you see a generation, if you see, God forbid, a generation where they don't want to listen to Torah, and they won't, it's not even, then you should sit and increase your own. You have to do for God. Kapora learns it this way. Fellows, if it happens that merchandise is cheap, that's the time to buy. If that's the time to buy, that means it's time for you individually to increase your Torah proficiency.
When everyone's
when everybody holds that Torah is nothing important, then you have to increase your efficiency, your capacity.
When it's not considered.
When it's not considered important, you realize that it is important. At that point, then you can go and teach it to them. How people, some people think it's an unnecessary burden. It's something that's not relevant to their daily existence. But if there are others that realize that they're lacking something that's really important, and it's important that they exist. It's important if they are become knowledgeable as to what God wants of them. Because like I learned Rabbi, and he says, I am so afraid of dying. He says, don't be so afraid of dying. Live and live. You've got to be positive in your responses. If it's an opportunity to go and spread Torah, you have to spread Torah. If opportunity somehow is, for the time, is boxed out from you, then you have the obligation to individually strive to become...
You need a time when no one wants to hear from you.
Then you...
$50 a year, right?
How much?
$50. I tell you, I'm a seller.
I gave it to him. You listening?
The ethics of the fathers, and it's partial. It's a part of the.
And Leo says, "Say l'chol Rav, make for yourself a teacher, v'istalik min hasofek, and go away from the doubt. Harba la'asar amados, and don't go and always give meiser by just yes. Meiser, you're supposed to give a tenth to the Levi as his portion.
Which?
This is Mishnah Tezayin.
Tezayin, okay. That's what I see.
Rabbi Gamliel says, "Asay l'chol Rav, make for yourself a teacher, v'istalek min hasofek, and go away from the doubt. All the time, meiser by guesswork. You got to give a tenth for him to be able to eat his crop. He's got to give certain portions of it. First, he's got to give truma to the kohen. Then he's got to give meiser to the Levi, and he's got to do this before to give the Kohanim and the Levi'im their portion because they do the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash, and they were entitled to this. They have certain obligations. Nowadays we give tzedakah. You're supposed to give at least a tenth of your income, and 20% if you wish to. But when you read the words, the way that you would imagine, it's talk about that you have to pay money to acquire a teacher to teach you Torah, doesn't it? Well, make for yourself a teacher, but this is what it means.
Make yourself a teacher.
No, that's it. First, I'll go first with the Rambam. The Rambam, the outer column. The Rambam, you have it? You have it?
Yes.
Right. This is Tessa.
What we command us here to make a teacher, it's not talking about making yourself a teacher in relation to learning. Rambam says that's not what it's teaching you at all. Havel hora. This is in relation to when you Baruch Hashem, you get to the Madrega, that you can paskin a shayla. In other words, you have smicha, and you have learned the yeshiva for many years, and Baruch Hashem, that you are now capable of paskin a shayla in a proper way. So now that you're a big-time Rav, a shayla comes to you, and it's not an easy shayla. It's a hard shayla. And it's not something that you can just know. It's something that even if you study a long time, you're never sure that you are correct in your psak. I told you this story before. My Chaim David, he used to say in the old country, when there ever become a difficult problem, a question of halacha, of deciding a question of halacha, in the old country they'd go, of course, to the big rabbonim. They asked the shaila. And the big rabbonim didn't just paskin the shayla just like that. They would correspond among each other, and sometimes it would take many months before they would come to a conclusion as to exactly what you want to do. He says nowadays a person graduates from the yeshiva, he's already now he's a rabbi in some kind of a thing, and lo and behold, somebody springs a shayla. So he lifts up the telephone and he wants his teacher to tell him right on the spot what the yeah.
And they had to do it, and they did it.
This is not referring to a person teaching you, but in effect, and the truth is, when you're paskin shayla, you're learning Torah, obviously, but you're learning on a much higher level. So it means like this: seek for yourself another posek, that you can depend on him. The Isser Ater and anything involving something prohibited or permissible, he's talking, and you should go and remove yourself from the doubt that you are in now. You're a posik, you're trying to decide a question. Don't say it's perfectly legitimate. Not only is it legitimate, it's what you should do. Just like we learn the Gemara in Yerushalmi, Zil Eisen Ashuk, just go and find me a Talmud scholar from the marketplace, Samach Alel, that I can depend on him for a decision. I'm in doubt. Maybe he knows more about this in this particular case. Very well, and I'll be happy for you. Akach Tzivo, and also he commanded that a person run away from trying to do the giving meiser just by guess. He's got a measure. Sveikus, but it's also a question of doubt. You can't just by looking over a thing and guessing exactly what it's a question of doubt. Now, this is what the Rambam says. Actually, Tiferes tells us that it's a question here of whether or not you're doing the job at all. Because obviously, if you don't do it exactly right, you haven't fulfilled the obligation.
What did he? So are you actually allowed to go?
Well, yes, we'll discuss that. But right now, let's see what it's in the bottom of the page. Say l'chol make for yourself a teacher, a suffix, and take yourself away from a doubt. Rot Shalom, he wants to say, you accept your fellow teacher, even though he's no stronger in Torah knowledge than yourself. Even if he hasn't even come to your madrega of your being a posik, today she's talking to something in order that you should go away from a doubt, because this is nothing personal here. You're trying to beat in a proper way, and there's no room for personalities in here. That's Bekeach Kovitz, and you don't know something. You're not the Rabbi Shalom. Only the Rabbi Shalom knows everything. The rest of us are just human beings.
Aren't you supposed to show your fellow children?
No, it's not a question of honor. This is a question of deciding the question in a proper way.
Yeah.
If you do it either way wrong, you can hurt somebody.
Yeah.
You're not just going to do. After all, you have a shaila in front of you. Go and find for me a Talmud Chacham from the marketplace. Oh, Ashrei lo, and I will be happy for you.
Why from the marketplace?
Anybody that
Anyway,
didn't make
the quickest one you can get.
Yeah, the closest one, and the one that, because sometimes Chacham is topic raw. Even a wise a scholar can be doubtful as to what he should decide the question as. He doesn't know what to say. If he makes it permissible, perhaps it is not permissible. Perhaps it is not kosher, or whatever it is. And through his agency will come a stumbling block. He need not go and do that to other Jews. On the other hand, if he's more strict than he should be, and he says, I'm going to be on the safe side, I'm going to make it prohibited, Nimso Mafsid Israel, he causes a Jew to lose money. Say if a poor butcher comes and got shaila on a cow, and in the old country they used to only shak 2 or 3 cows for the whole Jewish community. God forbid if you can't find a heter for it, that poor butcher is out of business. He's lost all his profits and plus his capital. It's no joke just to go and say, I'll be more strict. Who needs you? If you want to be more strict, he doesn't need to come to the road. He needs to find a heter. If you can find it, I'll begin. And the Torah is protecting such a person if it is properly applied. So you have no place for personal ego. So you don't know. It's not the end of the world. Even as great as authority, Hillel Hazakon himself. They asked him a shaila. The Gemara in Yerushalmi brings also in Bavli. They asked him a shaila, and he forgot what he learned from his teachers. So what did Hillel Hazakon do? He says, go and see what the people are doing in relation to this shaila. The Jewish people are doing. He says, even if they're not Naviim, children of prophets, even if they're not prophets, see what they're doing and do what they're doing in relation to this shaila. And they did it, and after they did it, he remembered, Taki, that was the halacha. They were doing it.
Hosek, if he forgot, you can't turn to somebody else that maybe they remember instead of going saying, go and see.
He was the God of Adon.
That doesn't mean. So it says you shouldn't hold.
I know. We're talking the circumstances. Hillel himself.
I find fault with
Maybe Shammai was on a trip. Maybe he wasn't available.
So we just learned that you don't have to have somebody of equal stature. You can turn to somebody.
No, but they had learned from his teachers. In those days, they didn't used to have Gemaras.
So if he
You had to know it by heart.
So he was. There were other rabbanim around that heard Shammai
Possible.
All right.
There's a million reasons. The Kenim of her time came to ask her shaylas about halacha. So the shayla is, why didn't they ask Yirmiyahu? Yirmiyahu was on a trip to Azar Shvatim. He went over there to visit the 10 tribes. So he wasn't available. So you go to who is available. It's a very nice if you got communication, but sometimes people are not accessible. They had only private lists. They didn't have anything written down in them. They had kept.
How? I don't have space enough.
They were geniuses. I mean, you're dealing with giants. You got to have respect. So therefore, when somebody comes along and he's going to go, Johnny come lately, he doesn't know even the Gemara, and he's going to go and argue with him. It's a joke. So Rav, therefore, you should make your colleague a teacher over you in this area, and ask of him any doubts that you may have. Even if the thing is very simple to him, but it's hard by you. The Matzius. Even to make it a permissible thing, you're very smarter than him, but this type of area you have to be no more. And so the Go'oni, the Lomad, every place where one authority is in doubt, Lamar's Poshetlei, another authority is certain. Hilkasah command the Poshetlei. The law goes according to one that's certain. In this case, the one that is certain, this is the halacha we're talking about. We're doing the best we can under the circumstances, obviously. If it goes even further, even if the rabbi forget, and the Talmud remembers, it's perfectly all right for the rabbi to listen to the Talmud and to refresh his memory. No big deal, and there's no question of no egel involved. The whole problem is it's not your Torah, it's rabbinic. You understand that concept? You've got to make yourself a teacher in any area that you may find temporarily you are not sufficient. In other words, this is talking to the posek, to the one that's deciding the question of halacha. You understand that?
Not to feel ashamed.
No, there's nothing to be ashamed about. Al tarba la'asera modus, and don't a lot of times make meiser by guesswork. Don't divide meiser by guesswork. All right. Because sometimes you might want to use this guesswork when you're going to go and divide your fruits, where there is a halacha that you have to have exact. So Iser b'ayin yofa, and he wants to go and give a little extra, like you said, a little more, a good eye. Give a little more. Masha modar, whatever he may have, Yosem in a series, but he gives more than the tenth on the bottom of the page. It is not something that could be used by somebody else because it's mixed in this mooser. It's not fixed up that the taxes have been removed from it. It is not permissible for an ordinary Jew to get.
No more?
Also until he actually goes and gives 10%. And if he doesn't think about it, there is something wrong in this particular type of division. And this thing is only a parable, talking about in relation to something else. From the subject matter of thinking out. A person is not permitted to do something that has to be exact on a guess basis. Like for instance, the halacha has to be exact. You can't guess. There's no room for guessing. It's either one way or the other. But you have to go on the proper way and the most important way, and to come to the end of the understanding. There's not all the thinking. And the wise person, even though he thinks that it should be this way, he can understand that another sage, could say it perhaps in another way. There's not only one possible solution of any question. It could be decided more than one way. And if that's the case, if he's not sure, it's only this way it should be decided, but it could be decided in a variety of ways. Only in the case where he's sure, it's certain, that if this is the proper conclusion, that he doesn't have to come to somebody. Anybody understands it. In other words, that this is talking about that anytime you have a doubt in any shayla, you must not depend on your own resources. If you have any opportunity, you must consult other authorities, and this is the derech in which I'll read you about Tanura.
You now have
the question here is
once it's been established.
The Bnei Yonah puts in the middle the Meister that you have to be exact.
He said this is only
in the beginning. He's talking about the Rav. It's all right. He's talking about the Rav, and in the end, he's still talking about the Rav. Why did he break it up? Why did he put it?
He said this is for a parable. This is for a parable. This is just to tell you that in an area where you have to have exactness, guesswork will not do.
So just like Misa has to be exact, so you have to be sure.
When you're passing,
and if you're not sure, you got to consult a colleague
or other authority.
Yeah, that's what he's trying to do.
You have to, if you're sure that you're right, but you're wrong. So should you still check up always with someone else?
In the first place, you don't pass in a shayla unless you have authority for it.
Rabbi has authority, but he doesn't know this very well, but he thinks he knows it well. So
then you should stop passing shaylas and learning them. You'll find out very fast. If God forbid it involves a tremendous amount of loss to one Jew, there's no time to play games. I had a shayla that came before me many years ago on the south side. I told you about it. University of Illinois, Yavne, the Jewish religious group, and they were torn apart about certain property rights and certain articles. And this was a religious Jewish group. And one of my talmidim suggested that they come to me for paskin. So I told you this about this. I had them have mechila. If God forbid I make a mistake,
because I'm only a human being, that forgive me ahead of time, and even if I made a grievous mistake and I paskin wrong, I forgive.
Why didn't you insist? Why didn't you insist on having an associate with you to hear the whole case, so that you can consult with him?
It was concerning property rights.
Still no, you're not sure that you're going to paskin right. So why did you take it upon yourself to the whole process?
There was nobody else who would touch it. Nobody else available to touch it. There was no Rav in the south side. There's in the south side, all the Jewish community in Wilton North. I was the only Rav.
After hearing the whole thing, or did you?
Yes.
Or did you wait to mull it over and then to do it that way?
They needed immediate decision.
I would have said you should have called up Reggie. To consult, tell him you heard the case and this is what you
He did not know. No,
there were too many details.
Too many details. But possibly, I had to make my thing.
All right.
They didn't. Not after that. I have a letter received by one of the people involved that he thanked me very much for the decision I made, and that it sealed a wound in there because I made a decision in such a way, the healed of the wound, that had been festering for many years. So I was doing the job, and thanks God they accepted it in the proper way. All right.
Why did you pick this section for us to learn? What are you trying to tell us?
Well, this is where we come up to.
Oh, you're up to this point in Rabbi. He's
Obviously
got a
from God.
message. I don't know. He wants to know about. He wants to.
No, I don't. What?
He wants to. He came here with the purpose of understanding what's the whole mice of Korach. He doesn't know.
Korach was a man that was beset with ambition. He wanted the position.
Well, what do you want to know about?
He wanted a position that God had not delegated to him. God had not appointed him to be the Kohen Gadol, and he wanted that honor of being the Kohen Gadol. He had the greatest wealth of any Jew of his time. He was the ancestor. He was the ancestor of prophets, many prophets, including Samuel the prophet. And he himself was a descendant of a lady who was a tzaddik gomer. He was a descendant of Kahos, a grandson of Kahos, who was also a tzaddik gomer, a complete righteous type. And he was a cousin, a first cousin to Moses and Aaron.
I think maybe also what Mike would like to know is what we're learning is sometimes it seems like we skip around a lot.
Yeah.
And he'd like to learn that, he'd like to know what we learned, the order, and what we're learning.
We learn like this. On Sundays, Tuesdays, we learn Gemara, we learn Shilas and Shulas. If you ask questions, we can try to give answers for them. And we learn whatever happens to come up. On Mondays, we learn Mishnah. We try to learn what we're learning now. Days, we prepared the Sedra. That's about Korah and everything. And on Shabbos, in another place, I learn sometimes Gemara, sometimes the Sedra, sometimes the Medrash, depending on what comes up. You understand? So this is scheduled. If you want to avail yourself of all the opportunities, come each time, and we'll learn something.
Said Thursday, and last week it was Korah.
Like for instance,
So
we learned
this
last
week
week.
it'll be,
We learned last
this
week the
Full
Mishnah
class.
before this. It was a very
No,
beautiful
this week's
Mishnah.
full
Did you learn the Mishnah before this? If you wish, we can repeat that Mishnah. That
What are you
is
referring to?
Omer. Yes.
Learn
Shammai
about-
Omer, Asay Soratzchot Kavam, make your Torah fixed. Tesvav.
Yeah.
Say little and do much. And you should accept, greet every person with a smiling countenance. Now look at very careful. Now there. First of all, if you want to, we can learn first Rashi. You have Rashi?
On what?
The inner column.
You think I only put my arm around you and I smile only for you? I smile for everybody.
Yeah, come on. All right, look.
Because I'm always
Why not?
smiling at him.
We're all your friends.
yeah.
Good friend, all friendly around here. All right, let's get. Shalom tehei kavua itim laTorah. You are not permitted to fix times for Torah. Here we learn.
You're not permitted to fix times for learning Torah?
That's right.
Yeah.
Listen, we learn in the Gemara. Listen very carefully. In the Gemara and Shabbos, after 120 years, you're going to have to answer certain questions from God. And one of the questions God's going to ask you, Torah, have you time for Torah? Here comes Rashi and says, you should not fix times for Torah, but what is he saying? Let's go
Well,
further.
there's a good defense.
Well,
The question I can say, I learned Rashi says
You
all
can-
the says further.
there'll be
All the day, ta'asena alecha kavah. The whole day must be fixed for learning Torah. In other words, your most principal activity, both day and night, must be learning Torah. And anything else that you have to do, secondary, that's where you fix the time to do it.
It means-
Torah, and the rest of the time you do whatever you want to do.
It means the time.
Let's go. Let's
You
go.
know what, he should learn 10 minutes every day. Progressed so far that now God is preparing to tell you, you don't learn 10 minutes anymore every day and every night. You now got to learn more.
Now, let's go to Rabbi Yonah. The same phrase. For second column, four lines from the top, 5 lines. Omer Shammai says, "Say Soros Chol Kaval." You should make Torah fixed. What does that mean? Kamosha Amru, like they say in Ba'alus Rabbi Nosson, in the 6th tractate, always Rabbi Nosson. Oh, also Iker. Anybody in this world that makes the Torah his most principal activity, Umalachto Tefelo, and his work, secondary activity, anybody that does that, he becomes the top one in the world to come. And the other way around, because anybody that makes his Torah secondary, Malachto Iker, and his work most important, makes him in the world to come
Sits in the back.
very lowly. Rot Salome wants to say, Alpha P, even though, look inside, Alpha P, even though, Shalol also Avero, even if he doesn't do any transgression at all, he doesn't sin at all. So, Torah Iker, if he didn't make the Torah the most important activity of his life, goes to Gan Eden, even if he's fit to be in heaven,
Yes.
Tofu Yeshamo, he will only be secondary there.
See,
This means a person, it's not necessarily in practice, but it means that even if a person only gets 5 minutes of learning in a day, to him that's the main part of his day. That's what he's been looking for.
In other words, it's not a question how much time you put into it. Say you may have to work 8 hours a day, but it's a question of what you consider your most principal activity. Yes,
Night.
it's nothing wrong at all. It's beautiful.
But then,
You're doing better than many people are doing. Well, no, I'm telling you, you got to work yourself up to this tremendous thing. It's not overnight and become a big time tzaddik. It works. You got to work at it. It doesn't go all of it one time, one fell swoop, and all of a sudden you're doing it the way it should be done completely. That's wonderful if you can do it, but most of us just have to struggle step by step. But you should understand that don't assume that if you go and throw a little bone and say, all right, I'm learning a little Torah, so I've already touched the base, I'm already in. Yeah, you may be in, but you may not be in where you want to be.
Very far. You may be holding the door.
You may
make
be
it for everlasting,
Yeah.
and you would like to be in a higher place.
You know what?
That ability. by
Well,
not
there's no reason in the
putting in
world,
time.
as long as there's life, there's hope. You're still here.
Yeah.
You're not. So there's plenty of room for improvement. We're not talking about it's already happened already, and you already told me you missed the boat. Forget it. You're here already, so you can do something about it. But it's not to be misled by phrases. Say you fix a time for Torah. He says when you fix a time for Torah, it means that your time principal activity is Torah. Anything else you have to do is just a temporary, secondary thing, and it's got to come back to it.
That's
so
the,
how will you answer it?
What?
How will you answer?
How will you answer what?
you got a long time. You're doing 15 minutes a day now.
Work it up.
Next month you can do, and in a couple of months you can do an hour, and in a year you can do 2-3 hours a day, and by the time you're my age you can do 8 hours a day or 6 hours a day. I mean, there's no problem. You just got to increase the load as you go along. As you can carry it. I didn't do wrong by telling you 10 minutes a day. Or 15
No, you got to start.
But that isn't the end of it. When you're
You're just
10 years
beginning.
from now, you can't get by on 10 minutes a day. But you just gradually start and increase it as you can until you're learning more than...
You have to understand all these things are gradual, and you have to work yourself up to a higher spiritual plane. It doesn't happen accidentally. It works by hard work. If you work on it on a serious level, you'll eventually get it. All right, now look at the Rambam says in the same phrase. First, make the learning of Torah the root and the most principal thing of your activity. And any other activities, your activities The Moshkim al Karov should scream after it. In other words, you fill it in, you put it in, whatever you got. In these Zoman, if it happens. If you make it, Zoman. And you don't make it, you don't make it. Forget it. Don't get so excited about
the
secondary thing. Yes.
That's the first thing.
Yeah. Thorough. You should be advised there will be no in your profits. You'll make profits. God will provide.
He's blaming me. I'm not learning 8 hours a day. Do you do? I says no, but I would like to. I know I would want to. I like to. I could sit down and do it for a few hours.
I'm not being personal. No,
don't.
I'm just talking about what we have to aim for. There is a certain attitude. An attitude must never be that you're such a wonderful type that there's no room for improvement. You shouldn't feel in your own mind, oh, I'm wonderful and God in heaven must be happy that I'm around. No, that's not quite the attitude. Well, I should be that way.
Related to this, I was learning his mouth to his heart, meaning what he says and what he does to what he says. But my question is, what if what you feel is as good as what you say or what you do? How do you get your attitude?
You have to increase your attitude to understand, first of all, God has bestowed upon every one of us tremendous amount of good things all our life. And God knows, and we should know, that we didn't earn it. He's been pouring it on us every day of our life, every second of our life. He gives us life. We earned it? We didn't earn it. He's given it to us. So we're tremendously in his debt. No question about that. And it's not the debt's not getting smaller. It's getting increasing every day we live. We're more increased in debt. So hopefully God's got an investment already. Maybe he'll allow us to give a chance to maybe reciprocate in the small measures that we can do. But for us to be petty in relation to God after he has been very magnanimous in relation to us is really ridiculous. We have to do our level best in his service. And the only way we can do our level best is to concentrate. Listen, at the edge of the camp, at the beginning of the middle, from here we learn out that the night starts at 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock in the morning, so that would be the middle
school hours
of the secret in it, and they spread out, completely encircle the big enemy.
The things that everybody wake up in the middle of the night, Rabbi and Gideon, and there they wake up and they see 100.